Allison, good evening. Here in the state of Florida, we just crossed 1.5 million cases of COVID-19, an astronomical level of community transmission that's not just going on here, but all over the country. It's one of the reasons right now that we're seeing more cases of COVID-19 in kids and hospitalizations as we are for the general public as well. But if there was a narrative that kids can't get as sick as adults are getting, clearly that has been knocked down. The University of Minnesota releasing a new study that looked at 22 different states from the middle of May until the middle of November. They found 5,300 cases of children, that's 19 and under, in some cases as young as 14 and under, ending up in the hospital. It's a huge number, and that also does not include states like New York, Texas, and California, so that's probably underrepresentative. The upshot here, Allison, from the beginning of the study to the end, their averages went from 2 out of every 100,000 people having 2 kids hospitalized to 17 6 months later. That's the upshot. However, it's also important to point out that kids right now make up about 3% of all hospitalizations, whereas they make up 12 to 15% of all the cases. Here's something that parents should be alarmed about as well. When you look at who's getting the most sick, it's really 2 different groups. Those that are under the age of 1 and kids that are 15, 16, 17 years old, because their bodies most closely mimic those of adults. Bottom line here is that you should be aware, concerned, and taking any steps you can to prevent the transmission of the virus to your children or anyone else in your family, because everyone can get critically ill. In Miami, Sam Brock, NBC News. Allison, back to you.
If anybody can open schools, we can open schools.
Please wear a mask.
New York schools officially have the green light to reopen classrooms.
The teachers union said that public schools are not ready to reopen.
Officials say they just need more time.
All these false starts are very frustrating.
In September 2020, New York City public schools opened their doors to students for the first time since March, an undertaking no other major school system in the country was even attempting at the time. Since then, the racial divide that's long existed in New York City public schools has come to the forefront once again. About a third of the city's 1.1 million students opted for some kind of in-person learning since the beginning of the school year. But in November, a citywide positivity rate of 3% closed schools indefinitely for middle and high schoolers.
Breaking news out of New York City. Starting tomorrow, the city's public schools will close because of COVID-19.
The city's youngest students and those who require specialized instruction were allowed to return in December. Everybody else is still remote. Of roughly 161,000 students that did return, there were 12,000 more white students than black students, despite black students making up a larger portion of the school system as a whole. Another way to put it, white kids make up only 16% of the New York City public school student body in this age group, but they're 25% of those that have returned. Given the shortcomings of remote learning, the situation has already begun exacerbating existing achievement gaps, with minority-majority schools almost 8 times more likely to report low engagement and attendance levels than their counterparts. There are any number of reasons for why Black families are choosing remote learning. Chief among them is the pandemic's overwhelming impact on communities of color. But there's more to it than that. London is an 8th grader at the Urban Assembly Unison School in Brooklyn, and she opted to be 100% remote this year. Her mom works as an essential worker for Greyhound, and that played a big role in London's decision.
I see my mom going to work every day, and I see the toll that it takes and how my mom has to wake up every day and constantly go out there where COVID is easily can be contracted. So I was like, I would rather do the best that I can to not bring in COVID or bring in anything that could be connected to COVID, because I feel like that's more important than going outside to school every day and seeing my friends.
London also has a strong support system in her grandmother, who's heavily involved at her school and in her education.
A lot of Black families have a great support system in place where other family members are willing to help and assist with them on a daily basis.
But one of the biggest deciding factors for London and her family was the lack of resources in her school.
I understand that, even though the chancellor and the mayor did say that we can have the windows open, to me personally, that is not a true ventilation system because, again, COVID is airborne.
Unison, where London attends, is a minority-majority school, and 88% of their students are eligible for free or reduced lunch. 68% of the school is enrolled in 100% remote learning. Roughly 3 miles away and within that same school district, things are different for one elementary school. 74% of PS8 students are enrolled in blended learning, meaning they're physically in school at least a few times a week. In contrast to Unison, PS8 is 70% white and 11% of students are eligible for free or reduced lunch. Melissa Dincher is one of the PTA co-presidents for the school, and while reopening was by no means an easy task, fundraising within the community yielded great resources.
The biggest thing to us was HEPA filters in all of the classrooms. We were able to go directly to the wholesaler and buy those for a discounted price, and we were able to also buy tents at another discounted price.
When asked how they aim to tackle this racial and socioeconomic divide in public schools, the New York City Department of Education said the majority of students returning in person are students of color, and our school leaders and educators have done heroic work to meet the unique needs of their students, staff, and families as we continue to navigate this crisis. London and her family say they're happy with their decision to stay remote, and unless something changes, home is exactly where she'll stay.
I think until the buildings are fitted correctly with ventilators, then we can send the children back. But until then, I think that's the real drive focal point behind a lot of Black families, that we're really not willing to risk the safety of our children.
Are you still convinced we'll have a vaccine by year's end and 300 million doses, which you had spoken of?
Am I convinced? I can't be convinced of anything, but I think that we have a really good shot of having something very, very substantial.
We will be able to deliver a few 100 million doses of vaccine by the end of 2020. And we will do the best we can to do that. Thank you.
And are on track to rapidly produce 100 million doses as soon as a vaccine is approved, which could be very, very soon, and 500 million doses shortly thereafter.
Operation Warp Speed is taking an unprecedented action to make sure that vaccine is delivered to hundreds of millions of people before the end of the year.
I will repeat what I have said many times before. We believe it is highly credible that we will have in the high tens of millions of doses of FDA gold standard vaccine by the end of this year, and many hundreds of millions of doses of vaccine as we go into next year.
We do believe that it will be widely available by the end of the year. It's why we partnered with Sanofi, GSK, Pfizer, and now Johnson & Johnson with $1 billion contracts to manufacture 100 million doses. So we still feel that we're on the right timeline.
We're on track to have one or more safe and effective coronavirus vaccines before the end of the year. We expect to have, if that's the case, 100 million doses before December 31.
We'll be able to distribute at least 100 million vaccine doses by the end of 2020, and a large number much sooner than that.
By the end of the year, we should be able to immunize 30-40 million people.
And we will have 100 million vaccine doses before the end of this year.
And we're just a matter of weeks away from having the first safe and effective coronavirus vaccine and tens of millions of doses available for the American people.
We will mass distribute the vaccine in just a few short weeks.
We plan to have enough vaccine doses available for use in the U.S. population to immunize about 20 million individuals in the month of December, and another 25 to 30 million per month on an ongoing basis from there on.
If authorized, tens of millions of vaccine doses will be available this month, and we'll get it distributed very quickly. We'll have that all set, and hundreds of millions more will quickly follow. Every American who wants the vaccine will be able to get the vaccine, and we think by spring we're going to be in a position that nobody would have believed possible just a few months ago.
20 million people should get vaccinated in just the next several weeks.
In fact, under Operation Warp Speed, we are poised to have vaccine for 20 million Americans before the end of December.
We've allocated and will be available for final ordering 20 million doses by this Thursday.
In total, we have more than 9 million first vaccinations already given, far more than any Western country. Nearly 38 million total doses of vaccine to date, including about 25 million first doses, have been made available for states to order against, with more becoming available this week.